Hey y'all, how you doing? So, I told y'all in a previous video that I wanted to do a fun video for you guys, but then I got kind of sidetracked with that whole plagiarism issue. And I also want to say at the beginning here that I really appreciate all the people who liked that video and who shared it across social media, and the people who emailed me directly and privately to show me their support against this plagiarism and copyright theft. So today what I want to talk to you about is a little project I've been working on, and I want to talk to you about my grimoire. This is just a simple little journal I got at Walmart, and it's the kind without the lines. It's dotted. You can see those little dots right there, and I like these because it's easier when I'm sketching in the little book. It's easier for me to draw in. But before I talk to you about this book, I have to talk to you about some of these other books I have, because in my career as a witch, hoodoo, sorcerer, whatever you want, wizard, whatever you want to call, I've had several grimoires, several magic books, books of shadows. I remember in the early 90s when I was first learning witchcraft, I had a little mead composition book that I would write in a little bit every day, handwrite in it, and that was my first book of shadows. And then what seemed to happen is, as I was so proud of myself when I filled that book up, because when I first started it, I was like, man, I'm never gonna fill this up, and because I'm such a neat freak, I always get compliments on my handwriting. I would, slowly and deliberately write these words, and I wanted to write it, a certain way, because this is before I sort of discovered myself as a writer, or other people discovered my talent for writing and helped bring it out of me. But eventually I did fill that book up, and it was such a feeling of accomplishment when I did that. And what I found out, what happened was, with these bound books, is as I grow and evolve in my craft, I learn new things, and I learn where maybe I had done something wrong, or maybe I felt this way when I wrote this and I don't feel this way anymore. And I found that probably about once a year, usually around in the fall, I found myself wanting to update or edit my book of shadows. And it was very hard because, like I said, this was a bound mead book. I can't just rip pages out and throw it away, and you can't white out all these pages and stuff. And so I started using a 3-ring binder. And then later, when I finally got a computer with a word processor on it, and I don't know what year that was, I really don't. I started typing up my Book of Shadows entries and into a 3-ring binder, and I'm very anal, as y'all know, being a Virgo. But this right here is my Wiccan Book of Shadows. You like that? What I did was I found this faux leather material at Walmart, and I glued this, the front and the inside, to a large 3-ring binder. And then I hope y'all can see it. I took a lot of time. I went through, you can see my stitches where I sewed this all the way around. And then it's indexed, because I'm a Virgo and I'm very anal. Y'all can see that. Oops, I don't want to tear these pages. My book is indexed. Can you see? There we go. Some of these indexes say, I tried to set it up like a real book. So there's like background, introduction, a glossary, symbols, codes of conducts, spirit, tools, clothing, names, ritual, initiation and dedication, meditation, visualization, energy, devotions, esbats, sabbats, birth, death, and marriage, divination, dreams, spellcraft, astrological correspondences, magical applications, and then spells. And then from there, I have tabs that go from A to Z, and the spells are categorized by the letter of the alphabet. And so what I did was, once a year, again around in the fall, I would find myself wanting to update this information. So I would just simply go on my computer, and I had saved all this information on my computer, and I would edit the script or edit the words or what have you, maybe add some artwork, and then print that off, put the new material in here, throw the old material away. And as you can see, every time I updated this book, I put a new cover page on it. And as you can see, the last time I updated this was in 2006. Okay, so this is my big Wiccan book of shadows here. Oh, so heavy. All right, but then, even though I don't really call myself Wiccan anymore, I really learned a lot as a Wiccan, and I can't completely pull myself out of that. And so, to this day, there's still certain things about Wicca that I like, and so I continued to write about it. And I know that there's people out there who combine Wicca and Hoodoo and try to make a brand new sort of system in it, or they'll absorb elements of Hoodoo into their Wicca. And I was guilty of that to a point in the past, but that was stuff that I did privately in my own practices. I never taught other people to mix, the religion of Wicca with the system of Hoodoo. Wiccans may not find that offensive, especially people who are solitary or identify as solitary eclectic or eclectic, and these are people who have no problem taking a little bit from here and a little bit from there and making something new in it. People who practice Hoodoo, on the other hand, in my experience, they are more, I don't know if offended is the right word, but offended when people who claim to be Wiccan pull Hoodoo into their magical sides of their practices, and then they change the rules or the tradition of Hoodoo to suit them. Again, in your private life, what you do in that respect is completely up to you, and if it works, more power to you. But publicly, I would never teach that, because tradition is tradition. With that in mind, I also have this little book right here. It's just a little sketchbook, and for me, sometimes writing spells is a way of tapping into my creativity. It's a way of working out a problem. It's a way of writing an affirmation in the form, of a spell. I'm looking for a specific one here. Yes, here we go. For example, it's about 2 years ago. It was just a little over 2 years ago. At the ripe old age of 45, I had my wisdom teeth taken out. And the procedure went off very, very well, but I had pain in my jaw for about 2 weeks later. And so, to take my mind off of the pain and to sort of write a rhyming spell or an incantation, it was sort of a mental diversion, but also something that I often do is I'll write a rhyming spell and use it in an affirmation, because there's a formula to it. Now, I guess I can explain this too, because someone saw a spell that I wrote on Instagram, and they asked me, how do I write incantations? How do I write spells? And so this is my answer. I use a formula, and my formula is I use 2 rhyming couplets. That means 4 lines. The first 2 lines describes what the problem is or the issue is, and the second 2 lines describe what's needed or wanted to address the problem. And then, so that it flows more naturally, what I try to do is make sure that the syllables in each line match as closely as possible. So if you have 7 syllables, 7 syllables, 7 syllables, 7 syllables, or close, you might have 7, 6, 7, 8. As long as it's close, when you speak it, it will flow. And so when I got my wisdom teeth out and it was hurting, I wrote, pain of wound and ache of jaw, I call on you to now withdraw. heal the hurt that left a hole, and bring comfort to my soul. And so that's something that I sort of chanted to myself and focused on, and it really helped me. Now, I know all Wicca and witchcraft isn't about just chanting a spell and things happen, boom, like on Bewitched or Charmed. But for me, the first part of writing a spell is writing an incantation, and then you do the ritual actions if you have one, such as lighting a candle, working with a doll, or whatever. Now, in addition to this little book, I've showed you this before. In my video on how to work a grimoire, I showed you my conjure book, or my receipt book. And this is a book that I have all my hoodoo information in. Let me see if there's a page I can show you that I feel okay with. Okay, here we go. Here's a page I added probably about 2 or 3 weeks ago. I wanted to write all this information down. Is how to train your pendulum, and then I have a section on pendulum boards, and then here are some little pendulum boards that I drew on index cards, and I made a little pouch to hold them in for easy reference. Here, I'll show them to you. I posted pictures of these on Instagram, but there's 3 of them. This is just a regular old yes, no. Here's one that's sort of like a Ouija board where you can spell out words and things. And then here one's more like a calendar for when you're using your pendulum. So I have all kinds of information in this receipt book on formulas, mojo bag recipes, honey jars, how to work double action candles, insights on astrology, tarot, Mercury retrograde, burning vigil lights, plant spirit magic, how to read vigil lights, various spells, and all kinds of stuff. So that's my hoodoo conjure book. Now, I want to get to my grimoire. Now, I've posted a few pictures from this grimoire on Instagram, and those of you who saw those pictures saw that I was calling it my fake Book of Shadows. Because what this grimoire is this is something that I began probably around the middle of April. Now, let's go backwards in time a little bit. On March 17th, amid the whole COVID-19 thing, I was laid off from my job where I work in an office from 8 a.m. to 4:30 Monday through Friday. And because I was not an essential worker, and so I came home and I found myself sitting at home, not really going out because we didn't know that it was safe and they were telling people to stay home. So what I did was I worked on my bullet journal. I talked to y'all about bullet journaling. I did several months, pages ahead, because I physically draw in the spreads for each week and each month, and I write in all the astrological information that's coming up because that's something that I personally follow. And I also wrote in my astrology blog. Those of you who don't know about that, you can go to twoheadedastrology.blogspot.com, where I write about astrology and hoodoo. So what I did was I wrote a bunch of blog entries and pre-scheduled them so that they would automatically post. And I did several months ahead on that, which I'm almost caught up. I need to write up the blog post for the upcoming full moon in Sagittarius on June 5th, which is, today is Saturday, so that happens Friday. So I have a little under a week to write that blog. Anyway, so at one point I ran out of projects to do, or I just didn't want to work on things. For example, I've told y'all I worked on my personal astrological charts. I showed you how I work with my lunar return chart in a previous video, and so I have all my charts written up for this year and up to July of next year. I'm talking monthly lunar return charts, my Venus return, my solar return, and I actually have a Jupiter return happening in December, and that happens once every 12 years. So sometime before the end of this year, I will finish all of my charts for next year, and then in January of 2021, I'll start working on my charts for year 2022. So anyway, I ran out of things I wanted to do, or I just didn't want to fool with the charts anymore. You kind of get burned out on it. And I needed something to fill my time and also to keep my mind off of eating, because I'm sitting home all the time. As you guys know, I've told you I've been on the keto diet. I've lost about 60, 70 pounds, and I still have more to go. And I didn't want to get trapped into snacking and eating out of boredom and not exercising and gaining all that weight back and undoing my work. So during this time, I fell into a routine where I started watching certain shows throughout the day while I was working on other things. And one of those shows was Charmed, because TNT shows about 4 episodes a day, Monday through Friday. And so I started watching Charmed, and I really got nostalgic about it, because Charmed came out, I forget what year, but I was probably had been practicing witchcraft about 4 or 5 years by the time Charmed came out. So watching the show, I became very nostalgic about it. And I started thinking about how, you know, when I was younger and witchcraft was still new and exciting, and I hadn't had yet a, you know, computer, so I wasn't involved in all this mess that people get involved in with witch wars and you know, my witchcraft is older than witchcraft, and my grandmother taught me, and what you're doing is wrong, and blah, blah, blah. You know, I had 1 or 2 people that I knew who identified as witches, and we just sort of, they were cool, and we just got together and did ritual and just hung out, and it was just a really happy, positive time in my life. So what I decided to do was, I said, I want to write my own sort of Charmed-like Book of Shadows. I had this idea. The idea was to create a Book of Shadows, a fictionalized Book of Shadows, about my life as a witch from the viewpoint of, what if I was a witch living in the Charmed universe, but I had no connection to the Charmed ones other than the shared mythology of the show. So I started writing in my grimoire about real people I knew and experiences I had, except I changed it up. I changed names. I changed the story a little bit to sort of fictionalize it. And I called it my fake Book of Shadows. So let me see if I can find an entry here. So for example, where is it? I showed this picture on Instagram. Here we go. So in my early 20s, I sort of fell in love with, I had a guy living with me. He identified as straight, and we also worked together, but at night we slept together, we had sex, and he was, at the time, I thought he was very beautiful. He was sort of the brooding, you know, silent type. He had all these tattoos, and I come to discover that as beautiful he was outside, he was ugly on the inside, and that he was a career criminal, and he actually stole a bunch of shit from me before I got rid of him. He actually went to prison, and this was in the early, I want to say 1992, and he's been in and out of prison since then, and even as I make this video here in 2020, he's in prison. And the way that I know that is the magic of the internet. You can go on the prison websites in certain states, and you can look people up and see, you know, when they went to prison. You can see their photo, what they were found guilty of, what their sentence is. But anyway, so I decided to write about this person, and again, it's a fictionalized event, a fictionalized version of something that really happened. And I decided to call him the Tattooed Warlock. And here's my entry on the Tattooed Warlock. I found this picture on Pinterest instead of using a picture of the actual person. And in my story here, I imagined him as a warlock who, it wasn't enough that he killed good witches, but he wanted to, you know, hurt them with the sting of a lover's betrayal. This is someone who seduced male and female witches alike and betrayed them before killing them and stealing their powers. And the idea was, his original power within the Charmed universe was to be able to turn two-dimensional pictures into three-dimensional constructs. And then what happened was, whenever he would kill a witch, a new tattoo would appear on his body that was representative of that witch's power. So I thought, okay, the eagle, maybe that represented remote viewing, and the butterfly gave him the power of shape-shifting or transformation, and the snake gave him some sort of supernatural charm or what have you. And so within my story, rather than being hurt by him, I changed my story, and I was able to vanquish him. So that gives you an idea. And a lot of the spells and people in this grimoire are metaphors for other things. For example, a warlock who tries to kill you and steal your powers. That is exactly what I talked about in a couple of videos ago. This woman who has stolen my material, my knowledge, my copyrighted material, and put it on her website, presenting it as her own. Knowledge is power. This is sort of symbolic or a metaphor of something like that. There's another entry in here I just recently did. In South Carolina, we have a local legend called the Lizard Man. I don't know if you've heard of him, but I did an entry on the Lizard Man, and in my story, I imagined that the Lizard Man was actually a human being who owned a pet store, and so he specialized in reptiles and lizards, and one day a wizard come to him wanting to buy a certain rare lizard for a potion or something, and the man refused to sell it. So in anger, the wizard turned this man into a lizard man. And so at first, the lizard man retained all his human consciousness, but over the years, his mind regressed to be more primitive, and he retreated into the swamps where he only really focused on his basic needs of food, water, shelter. And he only attacked as humans sort of encroached on his habitat. And again, this is my take on the Lizard Man, the local legend, but it's also a metaphor for protecting endangered species and protecting our land and environment, and how humans encroach on nature and destroy it in their consumerism. Let's see here. I have another. Here we go. Here is another entry I wrote on haunted objects, and I focused on a haunted chandelier because that's something that actually happened to me, and I wrote about that in an issue of Hoodoo and Conjuring Quarterly, and maybe I'll tell y'all the real story one day, but basically I came into possession of a chandelier that was haunted. Okay? Also, I wanted to mention too, a lot of the spells that I'm writing in here, in this book, I wanted to make sure that they are workable spells, because they do represent actual needs we need as witches, or desires that we need as witches. And so, instead of just making something up, I wanted to actually write spells that someone can do, in order to get this goal. And so this is a chakra cleanse spell. Right here you can see next to the one on haunted objects. And this is, something that you do. Now, of course, it won't work the same way it worked on Charmed, but it is a workable spell, and it will provide the function that you wanted it to. Also, I wanted to mention too, when it comes to writing about potions and herbs, again, I didn't want to make anything up. So here's an entry I did on 13 essential herbs, and here are 13 essential herbs that I put an entry about, and I didn't want to make things up, so I actually used Scott Cunningham's book on herbs in order to write about this. Another thing I wanted to talk about is how I had been really going back in my mind over people and events that I had experienced in order to make these videos for you. And I recently did a very short video on vampires and psychic vampires. And so as I'm thinking about these things, I'm actually writing about them in my little fake Book of Shadows. So here's an entry I did on vampires. Anyway, this is just a cool, fun little project I'm working on, and as I remember things that I want to talk to you guys about, I'll write about them in my grimoire. Again, if you follow me on Instagram, I do share some pictures from this grimoire if you're interested in it. So that's it. That's my fun little creative project I'm working on. How are you passing the time in quarantine? What are you doing to fill your time and grow your spirituality? Tell me about it. And anyway, have a great day, everybody. Bye.